Now we're going to look at the particular sources of law in the United States, both federal law and state law, and there are actually far more sources of law than you might think. So we think of the U.S. Constitution, and of course that's where we have to begin. The U.S. Constitution creates the framework for all of the federal and state legal systems. And just to understand how the U.S. Constitution works, first of all, there are three branches of government. We've got the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. The legislative branch is governed by Article 1 of the Constitution. The executive branch is regulated by Article 2 of the Constitution, and the judiciary by Article 3 of the Constitution. And having those three branches of government creates this idea of checks and balances. The idea is that the acts of one branch will operate in relation to the acts of another, and none of the branches will ever get overly powerful because they will always be checked by the other branches. Doesn't always work that way, but that's the idea. And with regard to the judiciary, their check is the idea of judicial review. And this is a very important concept for law, and it was established in a very early U.S. Supreme Court case called Marbury versus Madison, where because it's not actually in the Constitution that there is this idea of judicial review, but in Marbury versus Madison, the U.S. Supreme Court said it is the province of the judicial power that we get to look at a law, whether it's a law passed by Congress, or whether it's a law passed by a state legislature, or whether it's an act by the executive branch. We get to look at that and review it to see whether it is consonant with the U.S. Constitution. And so judicial review is really at the core of the idea of checks and balances, at least with regard to the judiciary's power to check both the legislature and the executive. Now, the Constitution lays out the basic structure of the different branches of government and also what's within federal power versus state power. But there's also the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights creates a set of amendments to the Constitution that are intended to secure individual liberty vis-a-vis the government. And we will talk in the next module about the Bill of Rights in particular. And after the Bill of Rights, there are a bunch of other constitutional amendments. We're not really going to talk about all of them, but you should just know that there are a series of amendments to the Constitution. The Constitution is not easy to amend, but it has been done throughout the history of the country. So we've so far talked about the Constitution, which clearly is federal law. Now we're talking about the Bill of Rights and all the other constitutional amendments which operate as law that governs everyone in the country in the same way that the Constitution does. Now let's turn to federal statutes. Now you might think, well, the federal government is supreme, and therefore the federal government can decide anything it wants, and therefore Congress can legislate anything it wants. But that's actually not true. Under the Constitution, federal power is very limited. Remember, originally there were individual colonies, and the individual colonies had complete autonomy. So the idea that we were going to have a national government that was going to control some of the things that had historically been the province of the colonies was controversial. And so the idea is basically all regulation is supposed to happen at the state level, and only the specific powers that are granted by the U.S. Constitution are given to the federal government. For example, in Article 1, the legislature is given, Congress is given specific enumerated powers to legislate in specific areas. And if it doesn't fit within Article 1, if it's not one of those powers that's enumerated, Congress can't do it. And that's true of many, many areas of law. So if you have just a run-of-the-mill, what we would think of as a sort of state regulatory law, and it's not in Article 1, Congress can't pass a regulation about it. Congress can't legislate about it. Now, one of the most important areas of congressional power is the Commerce Clause, which is part of Article 1, Section 8. And that gives Congress the power to regulate what's called interstate commerce. That's what Article 1, Section 8 says in the Commerce Clause. Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce, and you can see why that would be. We don't want to have 50 different state statutes regulating a national set of commercial transactions in 50 different ways. We need to have some uniformity with regard to the way in which interstate commerce is regulated, and so Congress has power to regulate under the Commerce Clause, but only if it's interstate commerce. If it's commerce that's all within one state or within each state, Congress wouldn't have power to regulate in that area under the Article 1, Section 8. So this is a principal idea of federalism. Federalism is the idea that we've got a federal governmental system and we have state governmental systems. And they operate in relationship to each other. And in some areas, the states are more powerful, and in some areas, the federal government is more powerful. And so the idea is, again, that all things are regulated at the state level, all things are in the province of state court systems, unless that power is specifically given to the federal government in the Constitution. Now, if it is given in the Constitution, then the Constitution's Supremacy Clause kicks in. And the Supremacy Clause says that the U.S. Constitution, treaties that are entered into by the U.S., the Constitution's laws that are enacted by Congress under federal statute, all of that is the supreme law of the land. And so what that means is states can regulate whatever they want, but they can't do something that is either contrary to a federal statute on that same area or contrary to the U.S. Constitution. Again, if it's not within the U.S. Constitution and there's no federal statute, states are free to do whatever they want under principles of federalism. But if it's in the Constitution, or if it's in a treaty, or if it's in a federal statute, then under the Supremacy Clause, federal law governs. All right, so far we have the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We've got federal statutes. What else constitutes law in the U.S. system? Well, one area is federal agencies, and we will spend some time in a later unit talking about federal administrative agencies and the way in which they craft rules that govern people. So I'm not going to talk about it a lot now, but you just need to know that federal agencies can also adopt rules and make adjudicatory decisions that have the force of law. So that's all at the federal level. Now let's turn to the states. States also have constitutions, and so state constitutions are law within those states. States also have statutes. And then there are local ordinances within cities, within towns, districts, counties may have laws, and so forth. So for example, if you were renovating a house or an apartment or something like that, you might go to the county supervisor of buildings and look at what the county regulation is for how you do your renovation. And so that would govern, that's a source of law. Now, that local ordinance can't discriminate in ways that would violate the US Constitution or the Bill of Rights, but within those broad parameters, every county can do it their own way. Other sources of law. Well, there are things called uniform laws, and we're going to talk about a couple of them later on in the course. But the idea here is it's not that Congress passes a statute, because maybe it's not within Congress's power under Article 1 to regulate a particular area. So Congress doesn't regulate it. But what happens is a group of lawyers, law professors, judges get together and they propose a law that they're asking every state to adopt. It's what's called a uniform law. And so the idea here again is we want to create uniformity across all of the states, but it's not an area that's within the Constitution, so we can't create a federal statute about it. What do? Well, we ask the states and we say, here's a model statute we would like you to adopt. And if you adopt it, lots of other states are going to adopt it too, and that will help with commercial activity. The most important uniform law that exists in the United States, and the one that we will spend the most amount of time on, is called the Uniform Commercial Code. And the Uniform Commercial Code is an attempt to create a set of rules that will govern certain sorts of sales and contractual relationships, and that will work across state lines, even though it's in each state's individual laws. Because it's uniform, it will operate pretty much the same way across all 50 states, because all 50 states have adopted it into their own legislative enactments. So the final source of law is judicial opinions. And of course, we just talked about this in the last unit when we talked about common law systems, systems of precedent, where judges make decisions on a case-by-case basis, and those decisions have the force of law, and they articulate principles that then create precedents that then get used in the next case. And so in a common law system, we have to pay attention to what it is that judges say and write in their opinions so that we know how the law is going to operate in the next case. And so judicial opinions are also a source of law in the US system. So we've just looked at, in a broad way, at the different bases of law in the American system, both at the federal level and at the state level, and we've looked at how each of the branches of government have a role in law creation and adjudication, and the important role that the judiciary plays both in providing judicial review to the decisions made by other areas of government, and also the way in which precedent allows judges to construct law over time. So you should go back and watch this video and all of the videos, frankly, multiple times, because this is a lot of information, and so if you watch it multiple times, you'll pick up different things each time. And also make sure you look at the other materials, the sample questions and so forth that are attached to this module, because it will help bolster your sense of familiarity with this material over time if you kind of test yourself and you read the other materials and then go back and watch the video again and so forth. But these are the sources of law in the United States that you need to know.